All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give it just another minute or two and see if we have some folks connecting to audio, make sure we're all connected and can hear and be present today. So we'll just give it one more minute. Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for all being here and sharing your time and space with us. We'll do some logistics and housekeeping, as we say, and see if more folks kind of trickle in. So like I said, thank you for joining us. I know everybody's really busy and I really appreciate you taking the space and time today. The workshop today is on California's 5th Climate Change Assessment Tribal Research Program. In particular, we're going to be focusing our presentation and discussion on round 1 of the Tribal Research Grant. My name is Patricia Kennedy, and I am the program manager for the Tribal Research Program with the Office of Planning and Research. So today we're going to present some background, focus most of our time on the grant program, and then have a Q&A and discussion at the end of the presentation. We are dropping a link to the draft guidelines in the chat now. This is really an invitation. You can have those open if you'd like to follow along or take a look at them. We certainly aren't expecting you to have read those at this point, but just really wanted you to have that resource. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, some housekeeping. This is a Zoom meeting. It's not a webinar, which means everybody can unmute themselves. So we just are going to ask you to be mindful of that. Remain muted when others are speaking to reduce background noise. We will have a designated Q&A or a question and answer at the end of the workshop. So when that time comes, you can use the raise hand function. You can come off mute if the space allows. To speak or ask a question verbally, and we'll call on you to unmute. But if preferred, you can also use the chat feature. And doing the chat feature, I think you should also be able to send a message anonymously if you prefer to do that. So any way you'd like to engage, feel free to use those resources. So with that, I would like to emphasize that the session is intended for tribes and tribal representatives. I know that we have a lot of advocates and partners that are interested. So if you're not from a tribe or you are not representing a tribe here today, we would welcome you or ask you to jump off this meeting and register for our session next week on the 26th from 3 to 5. We'll be having another session that will be open to all participants. The link to register should be getting into the chat now, so feel free to follow that link and register for that, and then we look forward to seeing you next week. The intention of this is really providing space for tribal voices. The program's meant to support tribally led efforts, so we're really looking to hear from tribes today. We appreciate your understanding in advance and look forward to seeing you during next week's session, if that's the case. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, with that, I have the great honor of introducing Geneva E.D. Thompson, Assistant Secretary of Tribal Affairs with California Natural Resources Agency, and a very close partner on the climate assessment to open our meeting today. Geneva?
Why don't Patricia and OCO everyone. As Patricia said, my name is Geneva E.B. Thompson, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, she, her pronouns, and very honored to serve as the first ever Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs at the California Natural Resources Agency. And it's, my honor just to introduce or welcome you all to today's session and to have this deep dive conversation on the 5th Climate Change Assessment Tribal Research Program. We're very excited about this program and wanting it to be shaped and led by tribes for the benefit of funding tribal priorities in this space. So, a huge Wado and thank you for being here today and doing that deep dive with us on these draft grant guidelines. Before we really kick off, I just wanted to acknowledge that the lands and waters here in the state are the ancestral lands and waters of California Native American tribes, and that the state of California is committed to early, often, and meaningful tribal consultations on actions that impact those ancestral lands and tribal communities. And so we really mean it when we say we're committed to this work. And so if your tribe would like to consult with us, either on this tribal research program or any other initiatives here across the state, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be very happy to set up those one-on-one consultations and have that conversation with you all and your tribal leaders. So again, please feel free to reach out and I'll put my contact information in the chat as well. Thank you again for being here. I'm excited for the conversation and I'll hand it back to you, Patricia. Wado, thank you.
Thank you so much, Geneva. I'd like to take this time now. I know we did have a couple of tribal leaders or elected officials that registered for the session. So if we do have any tribal leaders or elected officials on, I'd like to take this space and allow you to come off mute and on camera if you feel so comfortable and introduce yourself at this time. I'll give that a couple minutes. And then just a quick reminder to mute yourself if you're not speaking so that background noise can be reduced for everyone else. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone coming off mute. Let me know if I've missed anyone though. I certainly don't want to jump in. Anybody else that's on, everybody else that's on, we would love you to introduce yourself in the chat. You can share the tribe you're from, your role, whatever you'd like to share while you're joining us today. This really gives us a chance in these virtual spaces to understand who else is in the room with us, right? We're hoping to have a good discussion at the end of the session. And so sometimes just having that space, understanding who's in the room with us can help us feel more comfortable in that space. So if you feel comfortable, we would love it if you introduced yourself in the chat. And then with that, while you're doing that, I would like the Interagency Fifth Assessment team to come on video and briefly introduce yourself, your role, and then popcorn it to a colleague. Attendees, as these folks come off mute, know that these are the folks you can reach out to during the session. If you have any technical issues or any questions, you can ping them throughout the whole session and really after whenever. So I'll start with OPR, the Office of Planning and Research. That's the agency that I work for. So I'll go ahead and hand it to my colleague, Aaliyah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Becker-Lowe. I'm a senior planner on the Fifth Assessment team. I work to lead a lot of our regional work and some general administration of the Fifth Assessment in close partnership with Patricia and Jocelyn, who I will introduce you to now.
Hello, I'm Jocelyn. I'm an executive fellow for the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Happy to be here. And I'll pass it on to Katrina.
Hello, Katrina Lenny-Koenig with the California Energy Commission. I'm Deputy Public Advisor and Tribal Liaison. If you ever want to talk about any energy programs, I'm the person to reach out to. With that, I'll pass it on to Gabriel Rourke.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gabriel Rourke. Along with Katrina, I'm a co-lead on California Energy Commission's efforts in the tribal grant program here. In addition, I assist Katrina with tribal consultation on our power plant siting projects and supervise the cultural resources unit at the Energy Commission. Again, nice to see everybody here. With that, Quinby, it's your go.
Thanks, Gabriel. Hi, I'm Quinby Lum with the California Energy Commission. I'm the Tribal Research Grants Manager. And I think that covers everybody. So Patricia, I'll pass it back over to you now.
Okay, great. Yeah, everybody, we already heard from myself and Geneva. So that is our team that's on today. Like I said, use us, contact us, let us know what you need, and we're here to help you out. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so for today's agenda, we've already covered the welcome and opening comments. We'll provide you with a little background and introduction on what the California Climate Assessment is to really set that stage, focus on the Tribal Research Program, our engagement thus far, including the Tribal Advisory Group, and then we'll hand it over to the Energy Commission to go over the draft grant guidelines of the draft solicitation. Most of what we're presenting today was created based on recommendations either from the 4th assessment Tribal and Indigenous Communities report or input that we've received so far from listening sessions, consultations, and other engagement with tribes. So we're still on the development stage and really excited to hear from you and your feedback and input. Next slide, please. Objectives today is really just to share information and hear from you, right? So we're here to provide some background and overview, highlight those key components of the draft grant. So you don't have to fumble through how many pages of guidelines to get an idea of what it is. And then invite feedback and discussion on those guidelines. We are taking comments on the grant guidelines through February 1st. You can submit those comments verbally during today's session by requesting a separate meeting with us or in writing to tribalgrants@energy.ca.gov. And that link should be in the chat as well now. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, background on the California's climate change assessment and the Tribal Research Program. So with the passage of Senate Bill, maybe go to the next slide. I lost track of my slide numbers. Yeah, okay. So with the passage of Senate Bill 1320, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research was designated as the interagency coordinator for the 5th assessment in very close partnership with California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA, California Energy Commission, CEC, and then the Strategic Growth Council, or SGC. So we're all working really closely together to administer the climate assessment. We've hired a team of devoted staff to oversee the administration and rollout of the 5th assessment, some of whom you've already met today. And we also have funding this round to support the development of an extensive suite of cutting-edge research on climate change. Next slide, please. So we're really lucky to be building on a long history of climate assessments in California, starting with the first climate impacts report from the Energy Commission in 1989. Each assessment really has built on the previous one. However, it's important to note that the 4th assessment was the first time there was a separate tribal or a standalone tribal and indigenous communities report. And this was a really great effort by our tribal partners, and also the state learned a lot from this process, and which really built the Tribal Research Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the overall timeline of the 5th assessment and all the key components. The 5th assessment is going to run through 2026. So, we still have a few years, right? At which time, hopefully, we'll start the 6th assessment on another 5-year cycle. Here are the key components of the broader 5th assessment. You'll see the Tribal Research Program is here in red. And we will focus most of our time on that, but I also want to run through some other components that we're seeing here today. The climate data and scenarios is like that downscaled climate projections associated modeling to help inform further climate research. This is actually already underway and nearing completion, dare I say. So hopefully it'll be ready for release somewhat soon, and we will be doing additional outreach on this. So this is that core data, the downscale data that's going to help inform a lot of the research, right? And then actually, can you click one more slide over, Aaliyah? Thank you. Okay. So I wanted to highlight the core technical reports here, and that's really like the original climate research we're funding to inform and build the assessment through a competitive process. With the CNRA, the program will award research contracts to fill gaps in the state's understanding and of adapting to climate change impacts. So the awarded research will be in alignment with the state's priorities, the gaps that we've become aware of, and equity goals. So kind of all of the state's goals overall will be looking at this opportunity. That's going to come from CNRA, hopefully in the coming year. And while I don't have a list of research topics to share with you today, I am really excited. We have received some really great input from tribes on this, and excited to share that with you at a future time. So I really just want to flag that this opportunity for research is coming down kind of down the road a little bit, probably this spring. And I think that there will be a pretty good tribal component there. So we'll share more with that. It's very ominous, I know. So we'll share more with that when we know more. All public-private entities, including research and academic institutions, public agencies, nonprofits, community organizations, and tribes are all eligible to respond to the request for proposals for this core technical report. Like I said, if you're interested, let me know. We'll make sure to keep you up to date, but we'll also probably be blasting your emails when it comes time for that. And then if we can click one more. I also wanted to highlight this regional, topical, and statewide synthesis report. So this is really where that tribal and indigenous communities report is. There is a separate opportunity here for participation. Also will be coming down in the next couple of years. And then also thinking about how we approach working with tribes on the regional report, reports. So a lot of things, a lot of scoping, a lot of engagement still has to happen with that in the coming year. So just kind of planting a seed that will be coming hopefully as other opportunities to participate in the fifth assessment. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. The Tribal Research Program, that was that one part, right, of that last timeline. And here's all the components of the Tribal Research Program. Like I said, the fourth assessment in 2018 was the first time there was a focus on tribes with the Tribal and Indigenous Communities report. Due to the success of that, the hard work and the lessons we learned from that report, this program was built. Our goal with the Tribal Research Program is to make sure that it's meaningful and respectful to tribes, lifting up the great work that's already being done, supporting tribally led research moving forward, and really creating a partnership with tribes in California on our climate change work. So both building this on lessons from the fourth assessment as well as engagement and consultation since we started the program in this last summer, July of 2022. We are, as Geneva said, prioritizing early, frequent, and meaningful consultation with California Native American tribes. If you're not in consultation with us and you wish to be, just let me know. We really love those discussions and really, really do want to prioritize that. Additionally, the other components of the Tribal Research Program is a tribal advisory group. Our vision for this is that it'll be comprised of representatives from California tribes to guide the overall Tribal Research Program, provide advice through the 4 years on topics such as ensuring tribal research priorities are meaningful and beneficial to tribes, as well as many other topics that we'll be discussing. The Tribal Grant Program, which we'll dive into a lot more in a little bit. This is administered by the Energy Commission. Will support tribal participation capacity and encourage tribally led research. Consideration of traditional knowledges and tribal expertise in the fifth assessment reports where meaningful for tribes and culturally appropriate. And then that final, the tribal synthesis report, which is, what we kind of saw in the 2018 assessment, similar to the fourth assessment, the tribal and indigenous report will be produced that will assess climate impacts to tribal communities statewide. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to provide a little bit of just kind of like a recap on the engagement that we've done so far since beginning engagement and consultation in July of 2022. Next slide, please. So we sent letters respectfully requesting consultation to tribal leaders in, I think, late June, early July of 2022. We since have engaged in consultation with 7 tribes, have had several informal engagement and information sharing meetings with many other tribes, held listening sessions in July, workshops in November, and have presented at several conferences and consortium meetings. We've officially received approximately 110 unique comments, priorities, and suggestions from tribes, which, like I said, has built where we're at so far. So we focused so far our discussions on tribal needs for the Tribal Advisory Group, approach to working with tribes on traditional knowledges, and the Tribal Grant Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so kind of breaking that down a little bit, we heard a lot of input from tribes on the Tribal Advisory Group. We do want to emphasize that the Tribal Advisory Group will not replace consultation, and those tribes that have requested it will have ongoing meetings with us as they see fit. We're really excited to get creative and make sure that this process works for both tribes and the state. We sent through a nomination process from July of 2022 to just recently. Thrilled to have received a great group of nominees. We have made selections through the governor's office and are currently processing agreements. So we are excited to announce that group probably in the final guideline announcements. I think it'll align when we have our final guidelines ready. So we're excited to announce that in the next couple months. Next slide, please. Okay, well, we did some engagement on tribal expertise and traditional knowledge. We have a lot more. We've really just barely even scraped the surface, right? We have a lot more discussions to have a better understanding of what this means in consideration with all of the products that the climate assessment is going to produce, and how to best consider tribal expertise and traditional knowledge across the suite of products the climate assessment will produce. Our goal here is first to protect tribal data sovereignty, knowledge holders, and to lift up the great work that tribes are doing. And of course, trying to do so in a non-extractive way. We'll be reaching out more in spring of 2023, probably for more intimate conversations on what this looks like for you, your tribes, and your regions, as we start to kind of unfold and really see what this program is going to look like. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and what we all came here for, the grant program. We heard so much on the grant program that really did shape these grant agreements. We heard about eligibility, about limited waivers of sovereign immunity, indirect cost rates, and more, and it really has shaped these guidelines. So we're happy to dive in a little bit more into if you have any questions about what we heard, but I'm really going to save it for the guideline presentation because it is really how we built the guidelines. So next slide, please. Okay, we're going to start talking about those draft guidelines now. Next slide, please. some questions to consider while listening, some things that we'd really like to make sure we get your feedback on. Have we done a good job with this in these guidelines? How are you feeling about them? One is on eligibility requirements. Are there any eligibility requirements that create a challenge or a barrier for you and your tribe to apply to this grant? Do the categories that we cover, this will make sense when we get further into it, do the categories we cover the general themes, needs, or support that would make this grant more meaningful for your work? And then on application requirements or the submission process, just generally, are you comfortable with these requirements? If not, what specifically could be changed to make this more accessible? And then looking at this evaluation, do you feel comfortable with the way that we are looking to evaluate these applications? And if not, or if so, I guess, do you have any suggestions with these criteria? So just some food for thought. We'll kind of come back to these questions at the end of our presentation. Okay, next slide, please. And then with that, I have the pleasure of handing this over to Gabriel Rook to get us started on the Tribal Research Grant Draft Guidelines. Gabriel?
All right. Thank you, Patricia. And hello again, everybody. We're now going to present an overview of the Tribal Research Grant Program. As we go through this part of the presentation and through Quinby's part, you will see page references in the bottom left of the slides. This is to help you note and locate important information in the draft guidelines more speedily. Here, I'll cover some ideas about the program's purpose, eligibility requirements, funding amounts, and types of grants. The purpose of this solicitation is to provide funding for tribally led climate change research, support for tribal knowledges, and similar projects deemed to be a priority by tribal applicants. The information gathered from this research, as Patricia alluded to earlier, will help inform tribal synthesis, topical and regional reports to guide climate resilience planning with respect for the confidentiality and data sovereignty values of tribes. In the next slide, we'll talk about eligible applicants. This solicitation is open to all California Native American tribes, tribal serving non-governmental organizations, and other California tribal organizations. I'm going to define those terms so that we can be clear about who may apply. California Native American tribes include federally and non-federally recognized tribes on the Native American Heritage Commission contact list. California tribal organizations include entities controlled, sanctioned, or chartered by a California Native American tribe, and that are subject to tribal law, the laws of the state of California or the United States. Tribal serving organizations, on the other hand, consist of consultants and non-NGOs that serve tribes but aren't chartered or controlled by tribes. And I want to emphasize again that in this grant program, we will not require tribes to sign a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. That idea is right out. And now let's get into how the grant program is structured, beginning with our grant rounds. There is up to $3.625 million available for grants awarded under this solicitation, and expect to release them over three rounds of grant funding. You can see the years of each grant round on the screen there. And we're estimating that between $1 and $1.4 million of grants may be distributed each round. Of course, that depends on the response that we receive from applicants and also the level of funding that they seek. Now let's look at grant sizes, how we're dealing with those. Funding levels will vary based on project type and size. Considering size, small grants are considered up to $20,000, $100,000 for medium grants, for large grants, $200,000, and $400,000 for collaborative grants. Diverse activities could be covered by grants from this program. And here are a few examples by type or size. Small grants might include single subject focused research, such as fire management, whereas medium grants could tackle more than one climate change topic: flooding, fire management, plantings that prevent erosion. Large grants could support development of a tribally led and extensive knowledge sharing program concerning climate change topics and traditional ecological knowledge. Collaborative grants, this is a new funding level that we added based on tribal input. Many tribes previously let us know that they would like to work with other tribes or tribal organizations to take on larger projects. So here we added the collaborative grant funding level and pushed the ceiling up to $400K for those. And we could see things like collaboration, of course, among multiple tribes, such as the Tribal Climate Stewardship Network, landscape or regional scale assessments or climate change projects, intertribal knowledge sharing programs, that sort of thing. In addition, any of the grant types could provide match funding for another topically related grant that a tribe might have, but that is not directly funded through this program. And finally, to provide further guidance, we also identified a number of project or application categories on the next slide. Here you'll see 6 of them. Each application must align with at least one of these groups. If more than one group applies to your project, you may identify one primary group and one or more additional secondary groups. All applications will be evaluated, scored, and ranked against all other applications submitted within the same grant round. Let's talk about what we mean by each of these project categories or application categories. Group 1, research grants, may focus on one or more climate change topics of concern to the tribe. Applications in Group 1 can propose research on traditional knowledge, climate change impacts, or climate change responses and mitigation. Group 2, assessment grants, consist of tribal climate assessments that focus on a specific geographic area on tribal lands or areas that affect tribal lands or members. Climate assessments may be as narrow or as broad as the applicant requires. Group 3, implementation grants, include climate change adaptation and mitigation projects. Implementation grants will need to identify the climate change impact or impacts that the project would address, the geographic area under consideration, and description of adaptive or mitigative activities. Group 4 covers information sharing grants, which we hope would maintain and advance practical and culturally relevant knowledge in both traditional and Western scientific practices. Group 4 grants are intended to improve and support knowledge sharing within tribes, among tribes, and between tribes and agencies, at least as tribes deem appropriate. Information sharing grants shall focus on communicating climate change research or traditional knowledges. Group 5 are the tool development grants, which would address imbalances in tribal access and use of climate change data by developing tools to bridge those gaps. Possible grants could include things like tracking the condition of culturally significant plant stands in a geographic information system, or creating user guides for complex databases of climate-related data. And of course, we can't think of everything. It was hard enough to put together this list, so we added Group 6, other. We encourage applicants that have relevant proposals that don't clearly fit into Groups 1 through 5 to submit applications under this group, Group 6. These submissions can include the implementation of traditional knowledges that have no or few known parallels in Western science traditions, but that accord with tribes' knowledge of human-environment interactions. With that, I will hand the presentation over to Quimby Lum to discuss our thinking about application requirements, evaluation, and timelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. So first, I'll be discussing the application requirements. These are in the same order as in the draft guidelines. So if you'd like to follow along, the page numbers are located at the bottom left of the slide here. So each application is expected to include the following documents. Number one is the application form. This includes basic applicant information, such as which project group your proposal falls in and the funding amount you're requesting. Number two is the project narrative. This is where you give an overview of your project, describing what you'll be doing and why it's important. Number three is the project team, and these are your team members, and you'll want to include any subrecipients or subgrantees that you anticipate working with during the project. Number four is the scope of work and project schedule. The scope of work is a detailed description of who will be doing the work and how the work will be carried out. The schedule describes the timeline for when the work will be completed. I'd like to point out the key difference between number two, the project narrative, and number four, the scope of work, is that the project narrative gives a general overview of your project, whereas the scope of work gives a detailed description of who will be doing the work and how and when the work will be completed. Next, we have number five, the budget. This includes your estimated costs and expenditures for the proposed project. Number six is the environmental compliance form. This is required from all applicants. It asks the applicant to identify whether the proposed project will cause any foreseeable environmental impacts. The California Environmental Quality Act, often referred to as CEQA, requires public agencies to identify the significant environmental impacts of their actions and to avoid or mitigate them if possible. Number seven is previous work products, if applicable. We highly encourage and recommend applicants to submit any relevant previous work products if you have them. This is especially important for group number three with the project implementation grants, and we'd like to see relevant work leading up to the point of now being ready for implementation. And we understand that not everyone may have previous work products, and that's okay, and we want to be open to all applicants. So we'll accept submissions without this item, but again, it's highly recommended that you include them if you indeed have them, especially for group number three. And number eight is at least one letter of support must be included from a tribe that will be served by or involved with the project. And next slide, please. So for the submission process, we'll be accepting both electronic and hard copy proposal submissions. The California Energy Commission has an electronic submission system that is available at gss.energy.ca.gov. First-time users must register as a new user to access the system, and a detailed PDF of instructions on how to use the grant solicitation system can be found at the second link on this slide. If you plan to submit electronically, we encourage you to register early and take a look at the instructions to familiarize yourself with what to expect in this submission process. More information and assistance with the electronic submission process will be provided in subsequent workshops and meetings that we plan to hold prior to the deadline. Electronic submissions must be submitted by 5 p.m. on the due date. If you prefer to submit a hard copy of your proposal, they may be mailed in or dropped off in person. Hard copy submissions must be delivered to the California Energy Commission's Contracts, Grants, and Loans Office by 5 p.m. of the due date. Unfortunately, we're not able to accept postmarked dates of mailing or email or fax transmissions. All applications must be received before the deadline stated in the grant funding opportunity. Applications received after the specified date and time will be considered late and it will not be accepted. Next slide, please. So how will my application be evaluated? We have two levels of evaluation. The first is for application screening and the second is for application scoring. The application screening process is to ensure that all of the applications meet the minimum requirements, that we receive them by the application deadline, that all required forms are submitted, and all submissions are from eligible applicants. The 4 criteria that you see here on the slide will be evaluated on a pass or fail basis. Some reasons for disqualification include late submissions, incomplete submissions, or ineligibility. So please be sure to read all instructions carefully and complete the application as requested before the deadline. Next slide, please. So application scoring is the second portion of evaluation. We currently have 5 scoring criteria for evaluating the proposals. The first is the need for or value of the proposed work. And this is 25-point value. Number 2 is the climate resilience and energy goals related to the proposal. This is 25 points. Number 3 is the scope of work and proposed tasks, 20 points. Number 4 is the team qualifications, and it's a maximum of 15 points. And lastly, we have the budget and cost effectiveness, also 15 points. So your proposal documents will be evaluated with these scoring criteria, and a minimum of 70 points is required in order to be considered for funding. Next slide, please. This is our tentative program timeline currently for grant round 1. We released the draft solicitation on December 9th, and we're currently taking, and we welcome and encourage your comments, suggestions, and feedback before we release the final solicitation, which is tentatively scheduled for February 2023, next month. After the solicitation is released, we'll be holding pre-application workshops. These will be open meetings where we'll answer questions on the solicitation guidelines and assist with the grant application process. Questions and answers from our pre-application workshops will be posted on the solicitation website. And currently the deadline to apply is tentatively scheduled for May 12th. We'll be posting the proposed awards around June or July of this year. The proposed awards will need to be approved at a California Energy Commission business meeting, which is anticipated to take place July through September of this year. And the agreement development phase will also be taking place during this time with an anticipated agreement start date in October 2023. The agreement end date is to be determined depending on the nature and scope of your proposed work, but the final invoice deadline will be in March 2026 to ensure that all payments are made before the funds expire. Next slide, please. So now we'll hold questions and answer session. I'll pass it back to you, Patricia.
Okay, so good. Thank you so much, Gabriel and Quimby. We'll take some time now to have a Q&A session. Any general questions you have about what we presented today? And then just have a discussion on your thoughts, try to get input. I see some already coming in the chat, so that's wonderful. Thank you. I just want to remind you the way that we're going to process this. Well, first, actually, if I can, Aaliyah, I think